ZombiU was a Wii U release title which boasts a Metacritic score of about 7.6 out of 10. It sold just short of 700,000 copies, coming up on 20 months after its release. For comparative purposes, since its release, Super Mario 3D World has sold over 2 million copies, and that's in approximately 7 months. To be honest, I was expecting more of a difference, as the game certainly occupies a niche. But considering it was a bundled game and it was one of the few titles on offer to early adopters, its relatively okay sales make sense. The game, a third-party title developed by Ubisoft Montpellier, those most well-known for the Rayman series, was developed as a Wii U exclusive. Because of this, my hopes were that the gamepad's touchscreen would be well utilised, feeling natural and not tacked on as an afterthought. The first success of this game is that it actually uses the Wii U gamepad to great effect. Ironically, I believe much more effectively than any first-party Nintendo titles have, barring perhaps Nintendo Land, which was also a release title, and Pikmin 3 following a recent update. The game starts with your character inexplicably wandering around the streets. After a heavily accented howl draws you in with what can be taken either as a heroic last-minute save or an act of informing the zombies that there's something they forgot to chew on, he proceeds to tell you that his name is the Prepper, and soon after will communicate with you through the gamepad like it's a walkie-talkie. The gamepad acts to enable you to survive, by managing your inventory and manually pinging a localised radar of sorts for the first portion of the game. However, what the gamepad giveth, the gamepad also taketh. By forcing your eyes away from the action to carry out tasks like removing barricades, hacking terminals and using your map, it frequently leaves you in the uneasy position of wondering if there's a zombie in the vicinity whose head you forgot to remove. Now, this wouldn't be such an effective system if the audio for the game wasn't so damn good. Zombies not only make eerie noises, but in between groans and swipes they can be deceptively quiet. The sound of a zombie attack and the sound of your now bloodied character recoiling when you've been swiped with a rigor mortis empowered death hand really provide the feeling that you're having your heart squeezed. Accompanied with the metric fuck-ton of threat that each zombie provides to an unsuspecting survivor, dishing out easily a quarter of your health bar per hit, and the speed at which danger escalates when multiple zombies are present, ZombiU stacks combat against the player more than any game that I can think of that actually forces you to fight so frequently. ZombiU is not a stealthy game where you can opt to avoid combat in general. Due to the slight sluggishness of the player and the competence of the zombies, running is rarely something that you'll benefit from. As if when running you meet another group of zombies, the AI will soon recognise that it's time for a pylon, and the zombies generally prefer to go on top. If you intend to survive, i.e. not die every 15 minutes, you'll be taking out pretty much every straggler that you can, often dishing out as many as 5 sluggish cricket swipes in the process. But ZombiU is also a gigantically sadistic beast that will occasionally stack things so that if you decide to have a crack at fighting, then you'll most likely die. Considering the allure of the permadeath mode, I applaud the developers at Ubisoft Montpellier for being such tremendous bastards. The game controls decisively enough, but the overall slow-paced nature of the controls really help to add to those fuck you moments that the game throws at you. And with the fact that dying doesn't result in loading, but rather in having to go and attempt to smash your former self's head in for failure, I found myself generally caring about dying, something that wouldn't happen if the aforementioned sluggishness felt unnatural or cheap. The game gives you a steady stream of weapons, and they certainly help to make things easier. However, perhaps due to the overconfidence that they imbue you with, or maybe the ease of losing track of your ammunition, you'll still be dying. After a couple of playthroughs, you'll likely be able to shoot heads and conserve ammo enough to constantly have something on hand for the hard parts. This means that the difficulty curve for the game looks something like this. The retrieval of items only applies to the last person that you died as, which means that if you die before retrieving your items, they'll be gone, and you'll be retrieving perhaps a few token flares from hapless survivor number 13, Tommy 2 Minutes. This often means that slow and steady wins the race, though the game will, via walkie-talk, convince you that you need to hurry the fuck up, and modern gaming conditioning will likely cause you to bite off a lot more than you can chew. When you die in a particularly populated area, the trek to get your gear back with only 6 shots of the pistol, a cricket bat and likely no meds means that losing your guns becomes a fact of life. Of course, the game will taunt you by constantly offering ammo for the guns that you've lost. Visually, the game is more than adequate. The textures are passable and the zombies are pretty creepy. I generally think that the not really explained shadiness around the border of the screen and the splotches of dirt that seem to imply that you're looking through a camera or visor, neither of which are the case, do add to the grittiness and help to cover the blander bits of scenery. Stylistically, the game does its job and it doesn't often look too generic or repetitive. This is aided by the fact that it's modelled on ye olde London, and amongst other locales features a Queen House and Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. The graphics don't really come across as those of the future, but it's a not cartoony game on the Wii U, so this was expected. I see no reason why the visuals would detract from the gameplay, and the whole lighting deal is pretty well executed. Your flashlight rarely runs out, and it recharges quickly, but if it does, in many areas you'll be immediately met with pretty much pitch black. Given a few locations like the obligatory Suri places, which are often short and sometimes have a nice castle-y vibe, the impending blackness is pretty spooky, or if timed during a fight, outright terrifying. As far as I'm concerned, horror, when executed properly, is contingent on the atmosphere seen between action sequences, rather than on the action itself. I mean to say that I care more for creaky floorboards and bleeding walls than I do for being chased by a man in a hockey mask. The game doesn't really attempt to be psychologically scary, and the plot is more intriguing than horrifying, but at the very least it doesn't rely on jump scares. Okay, well, maybe there's a few. Rather, it's pretty spooky in a realistic way. You're not being tortured, and you're not being stalked by a superhuman sadist, but you are also incredibly vulnerable. The game is harsh on the normal difficulty, and you should expect to die. It's important not to get disparaged by this. I'm used to busting through normal modes of games in a manner that feels to me like video game tourism. And I died a lot. The game offers an easy mode in the form of chicken difficulty, but given the name and the brief description of the mode, it seems clear that the developers knew that this went against what the game was about. As for the zombies, they have two primary types of attack: the aforementioned death swipe and a traditional zombie grab. The swipe will take away about a quarter of your health, whereas the grab will tackle you to the ground and instantly kill you. That is until you obtain a refillable syringe that acts as a means of countering it. I don't know that I think this was necessary. I've had the occasional fight where two zombies repeatedly tried to grab me, and it was bloody terrifying. When you have the syringe, it actually makes things easier. You get taken down temporarily and get an instant kill off on a zombie who otherwise would have been part of your cricket bat zombie juggling act. Smashing the head of a fallen zombie in combat doesn't grant you any kind of physical immunity, meaning that you'll be chipped away quickly if you rush to finish combat. This was a lesson that I failed to learn time and time again. Medkits and other healing items aren't rare, but they aren't common. But when you fail a retrieval and have to melee your way through certain segments of the game, you better be patient or you'll end up wishing there was more around. The game runs well, and I didn't experience any bugginess except for maybe the time when the zombies learned to clone themselves. I think that all of its devices for spookydom are well implemented and show the game to be much more than just a churned out release title by a big publisher, but that isn't to say that it couldn't have been better. The game is probably not for everyone. In fact, I didn't complete the game until the third time I'd set out to do so, which was after I'd owned the game for over a year. The reasons for this varied. The first time I played the game, I lost a character due to a rather unforgiving and perhaps poorly designed bit of platforming, wherein I fell to my death with my fourth survivor to whom I'd grown quite attached. That was really unsatisfying and I just stopped playing. There was also the time I tried to do a permadeath run and died perhaps halfway through the game to what amounted to a scripted zombie horde sequence chewing me out. Another issue is the combat. Perhaps just the inability to retrieve your valued guns if you die stupidly on the way to get your corpse. It's easy to feel that this can put you at a huge disadvantage compared to how you would have handled an area otherwise. And that can be disheartening and detract from the way that certain sections were actually intended to feel. This means that you'll be hitting things with a cricket bat a lot, and as satisfying as it can be even towards the latter stages of the game to paint the walls with a SWAT zombie that took 8 hits to down, this can sometimes wear thin. It also tended to feel like I'd played a good session after only 30 to 60 minutes, which isn't very long for me. It's a mixed blessing and it's a really surprising game to be released on the Wii U, considering the total lack of anything like it to date. I feel that I like this game in theory more than I do in practice. I mean, on paper this is the horror game that I'd wanted for a long time, and I feel that the overall challenge to the game is actually the difficulty curve. Also the fact that it does things like put helmeted zombies at the bottom of ladders that you'll have to climb down, meaning that you have to swivel immediately and get off some kind of attack to avoid being pummeled before you have a chance to manoeuvre into a workable position. Another gripe was that some of the connective areas are recycled, which given the general uniquity of each area just felt jarring. The story is okay. Being a British person playing a game set in Britain, London no less, and involving a queen house as a set piece, I did expect the voice acting to be fucking appalling. And I must admit that when the prepper first chimed in, I'd hoped that not every character in the game would have an incredibly strong London-based accent. But the voice acting was actually okay. At the very least, the voice actors generally came across as likeable. The music and voice acting intertwined to give you a bit of a sense of mystery, and the magic talking paper on the floor that reads out letters to you actually felt like they took a narrative line that wasn't quite the most obvious path, which again, based on my expectations, was a pleasant surprise. The main character's intentions aren't fully clear, and you aren't a demigod who just didn't realise it. The prepper is, okay, I'll say it, a good character. Everyone's relative influence within the story, including that of the player character, all amount to something realistic. Nothing about this game is too grand or too epic, it's actually just a story, and given the oddness of continuing a mission where the last survivor died when you spawn in, the game does an okay job of making it not feel too contrived. That's not to say that the story is fantastically original, but at the very least it's a flavour less ubiquitous than rubbing dicks and shooting aliens with warhammers, or kill all of the funny talking soldiers because they hate your freedom and would kick your grandma in the chest given the chance. As an aside, the original concept for the game was called White Rabbits. It wasn't a game about zombies, it was a game where you shot rabbits with guns. This sounds weird, but you have to consider that the team responsible for this had previously been working on the Rabbids. And with that in mind, the game concept can be received a lot more sympathetically. Later it was dubbed Killer Rabbids from Outer Space, and finally Ubisoft settled on ZombiU, presumably because they didn't want to outright admit that Rabbids are awful. Oh, and there's also a multiplayer mode where one person plays the role of a lone survivor who has to capture flags, and another person plays the role of a zombie king or something. The survivor uses a Wii U Pro controller, and the zombie master uses the gamepad, which displays a map which you drag and drop zombie types onto. All in all, it's a pretty good mode, with increasingly strong zombie types becoming unlocked as the round progresses. But for the most part, it was just a case of trying it once, going, huh, neat, and not feeling compelled to try it again. It does have different survivor difficulty modes, meaning that you can get a decent level of mismatch for gamer level, and still get some kind of enjoyment out of it. So finally, over to the scores. I rate this game, yeah, it's really good. It's not your typical first-person shooter, so don't buy it if you're expecting to blast through something easily in a day. It's also incredibly cheap now, so it's hard to justify not just going out and trying it, and I'd recommend that anybody with a Wii U does. It's arguable that having to have the right mindset to play a game means that the game's not very good, but I think that's pretty daft considering how generic and samey and designed to keep the adrenaline pumping most modern mature games are. While ZombiU isn't perfection, it pushes the boat out further than any other big budget titles that come to mind in recent years. So yeah, get your horror appreciation head on and go play this game in the dark. You'll probably want to watch 28 Days Later afterwards too.